Lando Norris just reached boiling point after discovering that his entire Las Vegas result was erased hours after the race ended. A microscopic floor measurement under his car triggered one of the most brutal decisions of the season and destroyed everything he thought he had gained. You are about to hear how this single ruling exploded into a full crisis inside McLaren and placed Max Verstappen in the strongest championship position he has held in months. Stay right here because this twist is so dramatic it could decide the 2025 World Championship. The moment the officials concluded their inspection in Las Vegas, the entire tone of the weekend shifted because the data gathered beneath both McLarens revealed undeniable readings below the 9mm minimum. These numbers were not speculative and they were not based on interpretation. They were taken with certified instruments capable of detecting variations far smaller than the thickness of a fingernail. When the results appeared before the stewards, the finality of the outcome became immediate. What McLaren had believed was a stable second place for Norris collapsed beneath the weight of precise measurements that left no room for doubt or appeal. As the findings were relayed to McLaren representatives, the gravity of the situation became unavoidable. Every measurement of the skid block thickness remained consistent across repeated checks, and these checks were performed with multiple team members in the room. That level of consistency is rare, and it transforms technical readings into definitive evidence. A team can debate interpretation or circumstance, but it cannot dispute identical results produced through multiple rounds of inspection. In that moment, the team realized that the race they thought they had secured had already slipped away through a detail smaller than the width of a blade of grass. The shock spread quickly through the paddock because the disqualification of both McLarens in the same event is an extraordinary occurrence in modern Formula One. Journalists began recalculating championship scenarios. Engineers examined their own data to understand how a leading car could fall into such a breach. Drivers who had already completed their media duties were suddenly called back to react to news that turned the podium order upside down. Norris went from podium finisher to non-classified competitor not through an on-track mistake but through a measurement taken long after the crowds had left the grandstands. The timing of the decision amplified its impact. The ruling arrived more than 4 hours after the checkered flag, when the circuit had already begun shutting down for the night and teams were preparing their equipment for transport. It is one thing to lose a result through a late safety car or a strategic misjudgment. It is another entirely to lose it in the early hours of the morning after the race has ended. The Las Vegas Grand Prix became an example of how the technical regulations can remain active long after the engines fall silent, and how a single inspection can redefine an entire weekend. The consequences for the championship standings were immediate and severe. Norris should have left Las Vegas with 408 points and a commanding margin. Instead, he left with 390 points and a shrinking lead that suddenly placed him within reach of his closest rivals. Oscar Piastri's points were erased as well, placing him level with Max Verstappen on 366 points. The entire shape of the championship changed, not because of overtakes or strategy, but because the regulation requires absolute compliance in areas measured with microscopic precision. As teams departed the circuit, the psychological landscape of the championship had changed entirely. Norris carried frustration mixed with disbelief because the error that cost him so much came not from his driving but from a technical miscalculation. Piastri left the event knowing that an opportunity still existed for him despite losing points. Verstappen gained renewed confidence because a gap that once looked difficult to close had suddenly narrowed to a manageable margin. The Las Vegas ruling did not just modify numbers on a leaderboard. It altered the mindset of every contender heading into the final 2 races of the season. The foundation of the ruling began with the precise measurements collected beneath Oscar Piastri's car, measurements that removed all uncertainty from the investigation. The left front reference point recorded 8.96 mm, the right front recorded 8.74 mm, and the right rear showed 8.90 mm. Every one of these values sat below the mandatory 9 mm limit. These figures were obtained using equipment certified to detect variations so small they are almost invisible to the human eye. When measurements this refined remain consistent across several checks, they transform from simple readings into irrefutable evidence. Lando Norris's car delivered an equally clear violation when the officials examined the underside of his chassis. The front right position measured 8.88 mm and the rear right measured 8.93 mm. McLaren engineers observed the full process and immediately requested the inspection be repeated with additional team members present. The officials performed a second round of evaluations using the same calibrated instruments, and the numbers remained identical. In modern Formula One, when readings do not shift even by a fraction during repeated testing, the results carry the highest level of authority. McLaren understood in that moment that the technical breach had been confirmed without ambiguity. The regulation governing plank thickness leaves no space for interpretation because it protects aerodynamics from gaining unintended advantages. A floor that runs too low can increase downforce through ground effect, even if the team never intended to exploit that phenomenon. That is why the rule does not consider motivation or circumstance. It simply defines the legal boundary and enforces the penalty when the measurement falls outside it. Earlier rulings during the season followed this exact precedent, and the officials were obligated to apply the same standard to the McLaren findings. This consistency is what maintains competitive fairness across the grid. The timing of the ruling intensified the drama because the announcement arrived more than 4 hours after the checkered flag had fallen. McLaren believed it had secured a valuable second place for Norris and a crucial fourth place for Piastri. Both results would have strengthened the team's position in the championship and increased pressure on Verstappen heading into the final rounds. Instead, the confirmation delivered in the quiet hours of the night overturned everything the team thought it had achieved. While the grandstands emptied and lights dimmed across the strip, the championship itself was being rewritten in a closed room with a set of calibrated instruments. The recalculated standings revealed the full impact of the disqualification. Instead of holding a comfortable advantage, Norris dropped to 390 points, leaving him only 24 points ahead of his closest challenger. Piastri fell to 366 points, placing him level with Verstappen in the standings. The Dutch driver had gained nothing during the race itself, yet emerged as one of the biggest beneficiaries of the inspection. The dramatic shift demonstrated how a minute technical detail can reshape an entire season, altering not only numbers but the psychological balance between the title contenders. The emotional and strategic repercussions of the ruling were immediate. Norris went from calm confidence to intense frustration, knowing the error that cost him could not be traced to anything he did behind the wheel. Piastri lost a hard-earned result yet found himself unexpectedly positioned beside Verstappen in the standings, keeping his title hopes alive. Verstappen faced a transformed landscape, one where the gap ahead of him no longer felt insurmountable. These updated standings formed the foundation for a new phase of the championship, one defined by pressure, uncertainty, and a renewed sense of opportunity for every contender. The technical foundation of the disqualification begins with the behavior of ground effect aerodynamics, which control how these modern Formula One cars generate their downforce. When the airflow beneath the floor is stable, the car remains planted, but when the ride height drops too low, the floor begins to strike the track surface. McLaren explained that throughout the Las Vegas Grand Prix the car experienced stronger than predicted vertical oscillations. These oscillations created repeated impacts between the skid block and the asphalt, which accelerated were well beyond what computer models had forecast. Over the course of 50 laps those impacts accumulated until the plank thickness fell below the legal threshold. Practice disruptions earlier in the weekend made the situation even more difficult to manage. McLaren typically relies on long-run telemetry to refine ride height and floor load expectations. However, Las Vegas delivered a combination of rain interruptions and lengthy stoppages caused by circuit maintenance issues. These interruptions drastically reduced the number of meaningful laps the team could use to validate their simulations. Without sufficient real-world data, the engineers were forced to rely more heavily on estimates, and those estimates did not account for the aggressive compression the car experienced on the long straights of the circuit. The team also highlighted that Oscar Piastri's early race contact in the opening corner may have contributed to the excessive wear. Although the immediate damage appeared limited to a destroyed tire, the force of the impact could have transmitted into the lower structure of the car, altering stiffness and affecting how the floor met the track under high load. Even the smallest misalignment can change the rate at which the skid block wears across a long race distance. The officials acknowledged this possibility as plausible but clarified that accidental damage does not alter the requirement to present a car that complies with the regulations at all times. The characteristics of the Las Vegas circuit itself intensified the technical challenge. Its layout contains several long full-throttle sections where the car remains at maximum speed for extended periods. Under these conditions, aerodynamic load increases dramatically and compresses the suspension for longer durations. With the car running closer to the ground for sustained intervals, the skid block experiences more pressure and more friction. On top of that, tire degradation was significantly lower than expected, which allowed both McLarens to push harder than their pre-race models predicted. This meant the car spent more time at peak load, which increased floor contact and accelerated wear. When reviewing McLaren's explanation, the officials followed the exact process outlined in the technical directive. They performed repeated measurements using certified tools with tolerances far smaller than the violation in question. They then repeated these checks in the presence of additional McLaren representatives. Every value remained constant across inspections, which confirmed that the skid blocks did not meet the minimum 9 mm requirement. Because previous cases earlier in the season resulted in the same penalty under similar circumstances, the officials were obligated to apply the same ruling to maintain sporting consistency. The final technical conclusion was unavoidable. McLaren set the ride height too aggressively for a circuit that demanded a wider safety margin. The combination of unexpected oscillations, reduced practice data, sustained aerodynamic load, and potential structural disturbances caused the skid block to wear below the legal limit. In modern Formula One, even a fraction of a millimeter matters because the regulations are designed to prevent unintended aerodynamic advantages. Once the measurements were recorded accurately and repeatedly, the officials had no alternative. This technical misjudgment became the decisive moment that reshaped the championship landscape.